what is missing from the conversation to me, to a certain extent, is how we value our ecosystems. We do not survive if we continue to destroy our ecosystem. In fact, the biggest threat to us all, of course, is climate change. And if we do turn this around and find an economic mode of existing in which we are setting human well-being alongside ecosystem well-being as our two equal objectives, and then move forward. Now, I'm not suggesting this is an easy one, but what I am suggesting is that the pandemic offers us a glimpse of an alternative paradigm. Is not fit for purpose in the 21st century. This big population driver, and by the way, the biggest population driver globally is not simply the numbers, 1 billion rising to nearly 8 billion today. It is the number of middle class people who are spending $50 to $100 a day each. That number has gone up towards 3.5 billion from 1 billion in the year 2000. There's the big driver for change at the moment. And as we move forward, yes, we want to see more people better off in the world, but not at the expense of our ecosystem. And we are not going to manage the climate change problem if we don't move on to understanding the enormous threat that it's currently facing us with. So I just want to say, yes, the pandemic is a major threat. It's destroying economies, probably for a year or maybe two, I don't know. But the biggest threat of all is this threat of climate change.
I hate the term really, double dividend, but actually there kind of is one in the concept of green jobs. It's typical to think about green jobs as jobs in making wind turbines and solar panels, and they are incredibly important green jobs. But there are other sectors which we could very accurately call green jobs as well. So for example, the energy efficiency, the zero carbon army that Ed Miliband was talking about, the renovation and the refurb jobs. The interesting thing about those jobs is that they are more labor intensive than jobs in manufacturing, than jobs in extraction of materials, than jobs in even in sectors like aviation. There are places where actually you can put in place a low carbon recovery which is employment rich. And there's a few years ago actually between the last crisis and this one, where we looked at which sectors of the economy are really green job sectors, and one of the fascinating findings out of that is that you discover that it is largely, or to some extent at least, the frontline workers who represent green jobs, because they are not jobs that necessarily promote high consumption. They're jobs in care, they're jobs in social care, they're jobs in education, they're jobs in refurb and renovation, they're jobs in community-based services, they're jobs in the delivery of services to each other, they're jobs in craft and creativity. They're all very labor-intensive activities with a low carbon impact. And that has gone missing from these discussions, it seems to me, about the transition and the green recovery. We talk a lot about let's invest in solar. Yes, for sure, let's do that. But let's not neglect, actually, this time round, the huge opportunity for creating a greener economy that actually has worthwhile jobs in it for people who matter.
Working with different countries right now on their COVID task forces, I've been kind of pushing for really thinking through what it would mean to have a more purposeful type of bailout. As I mentioned already, in Denmark around the tax havens, in France and Austria around the airlines. Elizabeth Warren in the US is talking about the need to rethink the degree to which companies that are massively using share buyback schemes, which over the last 10 years has gone up to 3 trillion by the Fortune 500 companies, 3 trillion kind of siphoning value out of the economy, the degree to which they should be treated differently from companies instead who have a history of reinvesting back into areas like worker training, research and development, greening their companies. And that really requires a different type of language. We like to talk about leveling the playing field, but we need to tilt the playing field if we want a green recovery, if we want a more inclusive economy that Michael talks about. And so, using in some ways this terrible crisis also as an experiment in how to work differently together, especially in a time of need. You know, before COVID, there was already talk of bailout. So the steel sector, you'll recall, asked to be bailed out in the UK, but that was done very differently. Some other countries, like in Germany, where when steel came to the government, there was a condition attached to steel as a sector, not only you know, doing the kind of things that Tim was talking about, but also reducing through innovation and investment the material content of production itself. So reducing their carbon emissions, but through the entire value chain as a condition for the bailout that they received. And that's what I think we should be doing, thinking about that stakeholder, not just shareholder model of working under modern, you know, 21st century capitalism, and using this crisis both to redefine what to do, again, going beyond the shovel investments, but really kind of what I call mission-oriented investments towards big societal challenges, but also getting the contracts, the relationships, the systemic properties of the system to actually produce that inclusive and sustainable growth. And that literally means going to the contract level.
We've proposed a set of indicators that relate to each of my domains. You can measure the proportion of children who have a good level of development, age 5, a good indicator. The proportion of young people not in education, employment or training. You can look at quality of work. You can look at the proportion of people who have the minimum income necessary for a healthy life. And then, of course, the environmental indicators. So that we've got indicators that relate to our theory and empirically driven proposals. So there's no difficulty coming up, I think, with the right indicators. I've been thinking that we need both to learn from experience and project into the future. When we think about unemployment, so the news this week, apart from the furlough scheme, big rise in the number of people unemployed, particularly among young people. We last saw a pandemic in terms of jobs in the early 1980s, when the numbers unemployed went up to around 4 million. And we saw a rise in suicide, particularly in young men. And then following that, we saw an expansion of the north-south inequality differentials. Worse health in the north, recovered in the south with the transition to a service economy, a finance-based economy, and huge growth in inequalities, which we're still suffering from now. So now we have the current pandemic. The one to come is automation, which, like all big pandemics, will increase inequalities, will affect poorer people more. And some of those jobs that are going to go are good to go, because they're lousy jobs, not good for people's health and well-being. But we've got to then think creatively about how do people have a role in society? And what we've got here is a plethora of good ideas of how people have a role in society, whether it's the kind of green jobs that Tim is talking about, whether it's responding to the kind of mission that Marian was talking about. We have no shortage of good ideas of what would give people a real role in creating a better society. So dealing with the current crisis, but realizing the one to come is the erosion of jobs further into the future, means that we do have to think creatively. Are we talking about universal basic income? Are we talking about 4-day weeks? Are we talking about jobs in the green economy? How do we think? And I'm with David King completely. I've been obsessed, as you know, about health inequality. But we need to put that alongside the climate crisis. And there's no difficulty doing it, of looking at a sustainable, more equitable future and thinking creatively about how everybody has the opportunity to play a flourishing role in creating a better society.